What I wanted to do with this session is partly reflect on where we've got to and where we're going, and partly to invite you to raise issues, to ask questions, to make comments, to help us to shape the next stage of the scheme. And I suppose the first thing I want to repeat, really, is Jill's point that you are the pioneers. You know, you're the frontiers person as we push out into the wilderness of the NHS and, indeed, of a whole range of other kinds of provision and kinds of partners. And we were thinking back, Christine and I, that at the beginning of this, just over a year ago, you said we were being too cautious in thinking we'd only accredit 5 registers in the first year. And you were right. And you also said to us that we shouldn't set the standards too low, that you wanted standards that were aspirational and that were stretching. And you were right. It's depressing, isn't it, that you were right all the time. And you also said that you valued co-creation and the way that Christine in particular had led the collaborative design of the scheme. And you were right on that as well. And I think we need to make clear that today is part of us not forgetting that you were right in so many of the things you told us about how the scheme should start, and that therefore the co-creation idea has to be something we continue to work with in this slightly tricky period when we've moved from design, where co-creation is easy, to implementation, where co-creation is more difficult and challenging. But just to remind you where we have actually got to, we have now got 11 accredited registers. There's one just been approved this last week, not been announced in public yet. So we have 11 registers accredited, covering 24 occupations and probably over 40,000 practitioners. You are already larger than the 4 smallest statutory regulators put together. And within a year, I suspect that we will have a really significant number of practitioners working in health and care occupations, unregulated health and care occupations, that may exceed over 100,000 individual people. That's a really, really significant contribution to public safety and well-being and to quality of provision. And it is a terrific achievement in just a year. And I want to say that I'm really, really proud of our staff team, Rick and Dan and Kabir, wherever he's hiding, and Christine, of course, and all the other members of the authorities team who've created this out of nothing, and all of you who have made a really challenging journey inside your organizations to step up to the aspirational standards that you asked us to hold you to. And we know, because we've read all your applications, we've read those interminably long forms that Rick's designed for us, and we know how much you have had to change the way you work internally, some of you, and how many things we've demanded of you that you alter in order to meet the standards. So it has been a huge effort on everybody's parts. And we have ahead of us, too, some very interesting applications which I think will help to establish public awareness and professional understanding of the scheme in a new way. So there's one which I think I'm allowed to mention, which is the one that has just been accredited but is not publicly announced yet, which is the UK Public Health Register. So they'll be joining us over the next week. A very different group of people working very much in local communities with local authorities, changing, I think, again, how the scheme will be perceived. We also have the Academy of Health Sciences preparing an application. That's the people who work in pathology and in a whole range of computer and radiology and measurement sciences in the NHS, about 70 different occupations, mainly in hospital care, who will be joining us. And then we also have an application coming forward from the British Health Trades Association. That's a different model for us. They're the people who support people with disabilities, training and supporting them to use prosthetic limbs, to do adaptations to their homes, wheelchair provision, and so on. So they have a register of trained practitioners who help to install equipment and help people with disabilities to use that equipment. And they're going to join us. And they too will bring, as it were, a retail aspect to some of what we do. And it may be, and I'm sure this already exists, but it may be that partnerships can form between, say, complementary therapists working in the community and the kind of shops and retail outlets that the Health Trades Association will have, in order to provide greater awareness of the scheme and greater access for the public. So really we have, I think, some very interesting things coming forward, as well as great achievements behind us. And at the end of this year, we're going to do a formal evaluation of how the scheme has operated, and make sure that we can measure to some extent our impact and our value. But there's a great deal more to do ahead of us. And I think the most serious issue for us, which I know will be in your minds, is how do we grow the profile of assured voluntary registers with the people who really matter in terms of providing use and support to your registrants and members. So we need to engage continually and strongly with NHS England, and we've had Dean's presentation, with the employers who are members of NHS employers, with the Foundation Trust network and the NHS Confederation, with clinical commissioning groups, hospital trusts, GPs and primary care, trading standards at local level. I also think there's a huge area we need to develop around care homes. Many care homes use complementary and supportive therapies. Hospices use complementary and supportive therapies. I was speaking to the chief executive of hospice recently. He said it would be wonderful. He said they used therapeutic massage and aromatherapy in their hospice. He said it'd be wonderful if we could use people who were on an accredited register, so we could have confidence about the quality of what they were providing and about where to go if it wasn't satisfactory and you wanted to make a complaint. So I think there is a lot of scope for us. As you know, I think Bupa has shown a lot of interest in the scheme from the start and has said they will move, as more occupations join the scheme, Bupa will move to saying it will only employ complementary and supportive therapies and unregulated people only if they're on an accredited register in due course. And that's the direction we absolutely have to go in. And I think that was really was the point of your question to Dean, wasn't it? How do we get to the point where it's unacceptable for an employer to use anyone who isn't on an accredited voluntary register, and foolish for a member of the public not to do the same. And this seems to me to be a big challenge for us. We are a tiny organization. Most of you have few resources. We have few resources. The resources we have, we've already taken from you, so we have to use them wisely. But we have to think about how, as a group, we can use our influence and get our messages aligned. The second thing I think we have to do in the future is to refocus on quality. And I think we have to, there are three kinds of areas where I think that's important. My colleagues and I have to focus on the quality of the scheme. How can we make the scheme as well run, as efficient, as cost effective, as useful as it possibly can be? I think we ask you as the registers to focus on the quality of how you run your own organizations and your own registers. And then, of course, all of us are concerned to focus on the quality of the care and the provision and the services provided by practitioners. So I think we need three levels of quality in our heads as we think about the future of the scheme. And it's through quality that we present to the public, the quality that you present, the quality that registrants present, that will actually convince people that this is a scheme worth having. The third thing we have to do, I think, is build the evidence base. And I think that touches on Nick's question. How can we build the evidence, not only that the wide range of services offered by people accredited in the scheme are of value, and Dean's point, I think, is well made, and I immediately thought, I wonder if we could share in some research work around the changing pattern of people working in health and care, because there are multiple professions, and all around the world, you know, and we see this in our statutory regulation role, the boundaries between professions are breaking down. Governments in many countries are beginning to see statutory regulation as a block to innovation and change. You know, we might even begin to see, ironically, deregulation of some groups. And we've had a lot of interest internationally in the AVR scheme, because there are other countries where they see an endless proliferation of statutory regulation as actually being something that stops change rather than creates change. So I think there is scope for thinking about occupational boundaries and how practice which adds to the work of statutorily regulated health professionals can be made more mainstream than it currently is. But we need to build the intellectual case for that, and we need to build the evidence base for that. And finally, something which I think I've already said, but I think we need to do, we need to keep working on how the co-production model is kept alive in this implementation phase. So there are some questions that come out of this, and I'm going to throw up a few questions, and then I'm going to open it to all of you. You'll probably have more questions than this. But first, how widely should we or can we interpret health and social care as the framework for this scheme? So we have had, for instance, Christine and I, debates about a number of occupations. So I might mention beauticians, where I go, beauticians? That's not health or social care. And Christine goes, well, it might be. So, you know, we have to think about that, because we'll have groups coming to us who are on the margins of what we normally think of as health and social care, and maybe out with our statutory remit, but may not be, if we're going to be open-minded about boundaries. The second question is, should we actually aim to improve the existing standards within the scheme? I.e., should we try to keep pushing the standards up? And if that's so, how's that fair to people who want to join the scheme, for whom we've made it more difficult than those who are already in? And how could that be fair between those who are already in, some of whom might be capable of meeting a higher standard and some of them might not? And yet, we should, I think, all have a general aspiration that this scheme is about raising standards. So how can you do that and still be fair and still have a scheme that is acceptable to a very wide range of different size and different types of organisation? How do we get objective standards in areas of debate and dispute between registers? And the most obvious one is education standards, which I think we're already thinking hard about. But if two different registers for the same occupation have different standards of education and training, we don't know anything about we officially don't know anything about your therapies and occupations and practices. We have a very strong view that we shouldn't venture into that territory because you're the experts on that. We're accrediting registers, we're not accrediting occupations. But there must be some external criteria we could use to get a shared sense, because common sense tells me it can't be a weekend course. You know, we don't send health practitioners we really trust on a weekend course. So it's got to be more than that, but I don't know whether it's a postgraduate degree or a 6-week diploma. So we need to think about how we achieve that. How do we manage the risks that the whole scheme will face from one large failure by one register in, say, dealing with a complaint? Because the bad publicity that might flow from a single but terrible mistake around a complaint in which someone was harmed, and because of the scheme will get more public attention, could have a knock-on effect on the credibility of the whole thing. And how does the authority quality assure its own processes internally? How do you know that when your application goes through the process, apart from that we publish absolutely everything, but how do you know that I haven't taken that 10 quid from someone, or that we've been consistent in our decision making? By the way, it'd be a lot more than 10 quid. And that we're applying our standards and our judgments in a consistent way, because you have to have confidence and new applicants have to have confidence. So I'm just going to hand the rest of this session over to you. I don't promise to answer questions necessarily, but I would welcome questions, comments. Our team will make a note of what you say and what you think, and that will help us very much as we develop this scheme and make it even better and stronger. So, who wants to go first? Dan, you're in that corner first, and then...
Hello everyone, Liz McElligott from the National Counselling Society and the National Hypnotherapy Society. Just a comment really, I joined along the whole journey of doing this, moving from being an individual therapist now to being chief executive of the societies, and always feel very much that I speak on behalf of all of our registrants, and I would say we've grown tremendously, we've improved tremendously in what we do, and have always found the process to be very rigorous, but also had a tremendous amount of support from all concerned. So positive comments really, and we're looking forward to the next stages. We keep being stretched, but it's no harm, and yeah, so a positive experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jeff Thomas, Registrar, Play Therapy UK. We've always been enthusiastic about the scheme from its conception, and still are. Our recent survey of registrants on the benefits they've obtained has been good, sometimes spectacular in terms of the difference it's made to the remuneration and their amount of work. But there are not enough of the instances, so this is echoing your point that we have to spread the benefits of the AVR far more widely. I'm perhaps slightly concerned about today so far in that the emphasis has been on the NHS and the health profession. And although play therapists are concerned with mental health, they mainly operate in sectors outside health, particularly education and certainly social services. So we'd like to see more emphasis played to those sectors. Our second concern, which has been raised by registrants, is really about parity. Parity with other schemes within the PSA, and particularly with the HCPC. There's some practical examples here that we would like to see the PSA influence. For example, the DBS. All of our practitioners need what was a CBR check, and indeed that's meeting one of your standards, but these are not available from the DBS service for independent private practitioners. So we would like to see you influence that. VAT, again for independent practitioners, the Customs and Excise, or whatever is known as the body concerned with VAT, does not recognise AVR registrants as being exempt from VAT, which puts them in a one-down position compared to those in other schemes. Those are the points that I've got here, I think. I have a point on marketing, but I think that's more appropriate for the individual sessions.
I think those are really helpful points. I know Christine has done some work on VAT, haven't you? Do you want to say anything? Not that the Inland Revenue is the easiest partner.
I have, although sadly I can't say I've got an awful lot to say about it. But we did raise it with the department, and we sort of raised it a couple of times. And the response that we got back was that the HMRC were not recognising that. I mean, I think it's a conversation we continue to have with the department. Not that long ago since I raised it with them again. I won't put colleagues under pressure in terms of coming up with responses, but we are alive to that, and I think it is one of the things that we need to wait for the scheme to grow and to be recognised and start to build its momentum to get. It's not going to be a quick deliver. It's quite clear from the responses so far.
But I think these are these kind of things that you might call structural, aren't they? If we could just get over that hump. I mean, it's like the discussions we've been having with acupuncture and the blood and transplant service about recognising the safety and quality of acupuncture when provided by Nick's organisation. And if we can just start, step at a time, to get over these barriers, it will make a huge difference. I agree with you. And I take your point about it's terribly easy for us to talk NHS talk. I did say local authorities, I did say care homes, did say independent sector, but actually I think they're possibly some of the most hopeful areas for us. Who else would like to?
Thank you, Harry. Couple of observations, really. One is that I'd like to applaud you because from your questions, it's very clear to me that the AVR, yourself and the scheme are listening. And I think that's really important because I've always thought that the prospect potentially for the AVR scheme that it was potentially had better attributes to it than the statutory regulatory scheme, of which I've worked with for over 15 years now, etc. The other thing is I think that the questions are relevant, but I think the question 4, which was really about the professional conduct and the risks associated with that, unless the scheme gets that right, unless the registers that are accredited and potential registers in the future get that absolutely right, just one case can wholly hold the ship, the good ship AVR, below the waterline and we'll all sink. You know, it's in one sense a rising sea rises all boats. You know, a large hole below the waterline will take us all down. And I do urge the AVR scheme to really focus on that in the future. But thank you for listening, Harry. Thank you.
That's again helpful. And it is interesting because some of the smaller and newer organisations have never really had a complaint. So when we're assessing them and we are trying to assess what their complaints process is like, it's quite difficult to do so. And of course, we're not saying they should have had some complaints, but as you know, as any serious professional group knows, actually complaints are a sign that people have confidence in you as an organisation, that it's worth their while. I think we had early on someone come to us and say, actually seeing that this is an accredited register gave me the confidence to complain. So we mustn't be afraid of complaints, but we must be very afraid of messing them up. And I think that to me is and you're quite right, I think we have a workshop this afternoon on handling complaints, and I think that's an area of learning that we really should share between us. Sorry, Sally.
Yeah, Harry, I want to address 2 of your questions, really. The one about should the AVR be looking at continuous improvement and changes to its standards, and is that fair to new applicants and existing applicants? Well, I would hope that you've accredited 10 registers. You haven't ever said no to a register yet, but there must be registers where we know you've deferred them and you've sent them back. So there must be sufficient learning to be extracted from that to get some consistency of what has been improved, what has been changed. And you should change things, you should increase them, but if it's unfair to new applicants, it's also unfair to existing ones. So it's actually fair to both, as long as there is a rationale. Equally unfair to both, as long as there's a rationale. Hmm? Yes. Yes, yeah. Coming back to your last question about the consistency of your own processes, which you know I raised yesterday, I think that you have got enough assessment decisions that you could scrutinise those decisions. You must know when you have looked at these applications where on a certain standard an organisation has just hit the standard, been borderline, been well above it, and you can then triangulate that by taking assessment methodologies to actually see, you know, what's a good performance, what's a poor performance, how consistent have your judgments been in that. So it's quite a sort of a scientific approach. Now you've got a sufficient body of knowledge and data to do that.
Margaret.
Margaret Cayton, CNHC. Just following on from Sally's final point there.
How much time have I got?
You talked, Harry, about evaluating the scheme.
Sorry, Margaret.
It's fine. You mentioned evaluation of the scheme, and I know that you have an internal scrutiny committee, but I still do feel that some external scrutiny of the consistency of your decision making coming from an external body would actually be helpful, and I think also increase confidence. I'm not challenging your capacity internally in your own scrutiny committee, but just as we're subjecting ourselves to your external scrutiny, I would certainly find it encouraging if that process looked at the consistency, now that you've in fact got 11, which is, is brilliant. I just wanted to comment on raising the bar, raising the standards. And I think what's really important is to keep in mind the key principle of proportionality. I mean, I am devoted to continuous improvement in performance, but this is still based on, I know it's not regulation, but it's based on the principles, those 5 principles. So I think proportionality is something always to be at the forefront of the mind. And then just going back to where you started about raising awareness and engagement, the majority of the registrants for the CNHC are engaged in private practice. So I see one of the greatest challenges around raising public awareness. When do the public start asking, are you on that register? And I know it's really, really hard. All of the statutory regulators struggle with this as well. But I would want to be sure that strand is in there in some ongoing work.
Thank you.
Harry.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning, I'm Lynn Souter Anderson from Play Therapy UK. I sit here this morning with my name on 2 different registers, which I find quite amusing. So yeah, I'm beginning to feel that I'm registered out a little bit. And I recall when first knowing that my name would go onto registers through the application process, I recall looking at what is the AVR, what is it all about? And as I sit here today, I think about the enormity of your task and the briefs that you're covering. And the fact that hearing there are more bodies that are applying for registration, it's a huge, it's a mushrooming process that is underway. And perhaps I have a rude question for you, but is the board of AVR big enough to do this? It sounds like an enormous task. And I would be really curious. I'd be really curious to know who is involved, or who's up there making these decisions. You have a huge task ahead. It's a very big one. And if all these different bodies want to come on board, maybe I need to go back onto Google and look up AVR again. But I don't think there's enough out there in terms of advertisements, the registers.
You're absolutely right in terms of the size of the task, but I think Jill would expect me to say, as I always do, that the whole of the Professional Standards Authority is small and incredibly efficient and effective, because that's what we ought to be. But yes, the challenge with this scheme is it's self-funding. So although we have a small and extremely valuable subvention from the Department of Health to see us probably through the first 3 years, within a couple of years' time, there will be no money except the money that you and your other colleagues pay us. And then there's the question that how much can you afford? What's justifiable to you in terms of what you and your registrants get out of it? So the truth is, this is quite a tight scheme to operate. What we do is we have 3 full-time staff doing between them 8 jobs. We have which I suspect is very much like some of you in your organisations in any event. We have Christine giving a significant part of her time as one of our directors to the scheme, and myself giving a small amount of my time to the scheme. And then we draw on people in our scrutiny and quality team, who are the people who oversee the statutory regulators, to sit as assessors on the panels. So our model is, just for that, I mean, those of you who've been through it probably understand it, but it also goes back to the point I think Sally made about, I think it was you, Sally, about we've never actually turned anyone down yet. The model we have is that the AVR team's task is to support and assist and nurture organisations until they're ready, all being well, for approval. We don't think we should take people's money and then leave them, you know, with a loss of £12,000 and no approval. We think that's unfair. And we can't give people's money back because we've done the work. So we do have a deliberate desire to get people to a point of approval. But we then have been pretty tough with a number of applicants. And the panel, which is independent, Rick and the team present to the panel. The panel is independent of the team in that sense. The panel has often said, no, we're not convinced that standard is met. We're not happy with that. We think they should do this. And we have on occasions deferred and postponed applications several times to give people time to get through the system. That's the way we've operated it, because I do think it is, I do think it would be unfair to small organisations to take them through the process and then turn them down. But there may well be a time in the future where if somebody insists on going through against the advice of the team, that's what will happen. Nick.
And can I just say that our next speaker has been delayed, so I'm sure we've got lots of questions for Harry, so we've got a bit more time for this session.
Harry, very good questions you're posing, but I'm going to shift it on to politics, and if it's a Chatham House rules, maybe you can be quite open about this, but I suppose my question is the politics of the Professional Standards Authority and then the politics of health. And in terms of the politics of the Professional Standards Authority, I'd be interested to know, following on really from my question to Dean about NHS employers, how much kickback are you getting from the statutory regulators that you regulate about this scheme, because it's a potential threat to mix up the market, as it's been alluded to before. So just about a comment on that debate and you know, your role really to kind of push the skill mix in a different direction. So there's the politics of the Professional Standards Authority, and then there's the big politics of health. I mean, I know we haven't got a crystal ball for the next election, but do you see politicians on both sides of the House, or all sides of the House, taking on this challenge? And they might be informed by your evaluation, but do you think that they will move away from statutory regulation or still have that as something in their back pocket if there's, for example, a risk to the public?
Those are nice, small questions. Can I take the big politics one first, and then the small politics? And Jill might like to come in as a politician. I think the big politics is full of contradictions. And I was speaking at the King's Fund Francis 1 Year On conference this week, and my take on this is that all governments, regardless of their political colour, oscillate between let's regulate everything that moves. Regulation is the solution to all problems of safety and quality. And then they say, we're going to slash the red tape. And most governments, over a period of time, don't slash the red tape and do add to regulation. So I think that's a sort of truth. But I also see very strongly that there's considerable concern in governments and in people who plan workforce in in care environments, that we don't have the right range of people, we don't have enough people, we don't have the people with the skills, and we have too many restrictions on who can work where and when and with whom. And Dean was making, I think, a polite version of what I think is a more serious political issue, which is the land grab by doctors of 90% of the spend on training and the small crumbs that are left for other health professionals in terms of the way budgets are allocated. So I think there are some serious political challenges around that big stuff of workforce planning, use of new kinds of practitioners within the workforce, and opening up choice to consumers and indeed to providers about who works for them and what services and skills and things they offer. So I think there's just a continuing debate to be had, and I don't think there's a settled position. The other position, I think you're completely right. I mean, all statutory regulation, and I have to say we see a bit of it amongst you, is about setting out the territory. You know, we own this bit of occupation. We own this bit of care. You know, after all, the GMC was originally a guild of doctors designed to stop other people getting the money. And regulation operates in some countries still as a cartel to keep out other people. So, of course, there are some people in the statutory world, and we'll be frank, Jeff's already mentioned the HCPC, who are probably the group that feel most uncomfortable about the accreditation scheme, because they've become used to being the choice for new occupations to come into some form of oversight by the government. And suddenly we've opened up an entirely plausible and different model of doing things, more flexible, cheaper, more co-created, and so on. So of course there is some twitching around that. And if you saw their performance before the Health Select Committee, they were not polite about the AVR scheme. But then I have my own opportunity to reply, so I can be not polite back if we need to. Jill's now indicating she wishes to cut my head off. And I think this is because our next speaker has indeed arrived. So we'll have plenty more time to come back to these discussions. Thank you very much. Terrific questions.
Thank you.